Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Entertainment Evolved. This is going to be an Evolved review. If you clicked on the episode, you already know what's up, but we are going to be covering episode 4 of The Last of Us. And this episode is pretty unique because we literally just got done watching it, and then we moseyed on back here to record the review. If it's a little off the rails, that would be why. However, before we get to the proceedings here this evening, I want to welcome my guest. He is back from the very first episode of Season 6. He's been on the show several times before. He is straight here from the Superhero Homies. Welcome back, Ace, or Superhero Homie Q, as you may know him.
Man, as always, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me again. This is like one of the quickest turnaround reviews I've ever participated in.
Well, we had to do something to try to top not only the episode 3, which had a pretty quick turnaround, but also earlier this week, you and I covered for your show the entire DC slate that was announced, and that had a pretty quick turnaround time.
It did. You're one of the quickest on the draw when it comes to podcasting.
I mean, we got to do something, man.
That's the truth.
It's hard out here for a creator.
Yeah, that's 100% the truth.
Got to get out the content. Got to get it out fast. Tonight's episode was definitely off the chain. Before we get into it, though, I do want to give a shout out to Stan, who was on for episode 3. I want to thank him for coming on as well. He actually just messaged me a bit earlier. And he had just listened to the first 2 episodes where we had Kevin on, also from Superhero Homies, shameless plug. He said that he really enjoyed that episode as well, that cover. So he's a big fan of the games. So.
Yeah, I had the pleasure to listen to those episodes earlier last week, and man, they were fantastic. Like fantastic breakdowns and reviews. I never met the man Stanos himself in person, but I've heard him several times now on your podcast, both on like House of the Dragon and for episode 3 of The Last of Us. And he's got some real insight there.
Yeah. I always love to have him on the show. So.
And Kevin's okay.
Yeah.
But no, I really enjoyed both of those reviews, and it was great to see or hear 2 uber fans of the game kind of talk about their thoughts, and especially that episode 3, because that's the one that people say greatly deviated from the video game. So it was interesting to hear someone's perspective who also enjoyed the video game as well.
Watching episode 3 when it went off, I think I needed about 10 minutes to just kind of sit there to myself. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that, I was like, how the fuck am I going to review that?
I'm so glad you bring that up, because the way that you felt for that, maybe 3 years ago, Kevin and I had a similar, arguably worse dilemma when we saw Joker, because we saw that movie and we were like, well, we got to do the review right now. We haven't even processed that movie yet.
Yeah.
That was so heavy. How do we do this?
Right.
Yeah. And episode 3 of The Last of Us, I can imagine, was the same way.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you almost don't want to critique it at all, because it just when something hits you that hard, I think it takes a while for you to be able to objectively look at it.
Right.
It'd be like if the first time I beat Final Fantasy VII, I had to sit down on a podcast. Thankfully, that didn't exist yet. And talk about it. I wouldn't have been able to give you any sort of objective viewpoint. And episode 3 of Last of Us would have been that way too. It would have been like, if you don't like this episode, you're a fucking homophobe, and you can get out of here. It was perfect. 11 out of 10. Would watch again.
I mean, so not to go back to an episode that was already wonderfully covered, but episode 3, a lot of people are saying it's their favorite episode of television, period. And I'm like, I have to sit on that for a while, but the fact that I even have to think about it speaks volumes for how good that episode was.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely – there's so much to unpack about that episode still. I definitely don't mind talking about it here, because I think that the theme of the episode, and we talked about this last week, the theme of the episode is that if you don't have love, and it doesn't necessarily have to be romantic love, if you don't have any love in general, platonic or whatever, if you don't have that companionship and that passion, then you're not living. You were just surviving at
Right.
that point. And before Frank came along, Bill was just surviving. And I think this episode, that's a tone that all the apocalyptic stuff tries to hit. Walking Dead tried to do it. I mean, like all of these things that have tried to do it. 28 Days Later and all
Right.
those sequels, whatever the fuck that Brad Pitt zombie swarm movie
World War
was.
Z, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff. I mean, Fallout has done a good job with it. But, oh, man, I don't think any one single entity ever expressed that in the way that episode did last week. In any medium. I don't care if it's television, movies, books, graphic novels. I don't care, man. I thought that, like, that was the perfect just magnum opus for that theme.
Yeah, I think that undeniably that episode is just, I mean, it's beautiful. It's fantastic. And I don't call a lot of things beautiful because my toxic male traits don't allow me to.
I'm not sure I've ever heard you say the word.
Yeah, I had to prepare my mouth to say it because I wasn't sure how to articulate it properly.
Right.
But no, it really was a beautiful episode of television, and it took me back because I mean, I guess spoiler alert for episode 3 if you guys haven't seen it and are listening to this.
And actually, episode 4 also. If
Right.
you haven't seen 3 and 4, go ahead, turn this off, watch them, come back.
But I was so invested in that episode, but also I just knew that they were going to still stick with the theme of the game. I thought for certain that when Bill and Frank took the drugged medicine or the drugged wine, I was like, well, Bill has to survive because they have to do the whole sequence when Joel and Ellie come into town and we have to get that whole thing. But no, we didn't, and that took me by surprise. But if I could just say one more thing, then I promise I have a lot to say about episode 4.
No, by all means.
One thing that I did notice about episode 3, because actually I watched it twice. One thing that I noticed about episode 3, in terms of how it compares to the video game, something that was very interesting. Obviously, is very different from the game,
Right.
but there are some really interesting and unique changes there that also kind of contrast with the game from the show, and that is if you look at like the the way that Joel leaves in the video game, the way that he and Ellie leave Bill. Spoiler alert from the game, but in that part of the game and how it compares to the show, Frank is dead. You actually find his body,
Right.
and he has a note on his body,
Right.
and the note it reads like a bitter breakup between he and Bill. And this is when you, as the player, discover that okay, Bill says your orientation is he's a gay man, and then you start to piece together why Bill is so fucking angry and bitter. But the way that the letter reads is like Bill never lived. He never got to that point where he was past surviving.
Right.
And Frank wanted to take that opportunity, and he ended up getting bit, and he, instead of turning, he decided to end his own life, and he wrote that letter just in case just in case Bill found it. But the letter read more like a screw you to Bill, and the way that Joel leaves that area of the game, there's a very subtle moment in the game when Joel looks back in like the rearview mirror, kind of just glancing, and as you leave Bill behind, Joel and Ellie leave Bill behind. It reads like a warning to Joel, where like if I don't leave that type of bitter resentment behind, that's what I'm going to become.
Right.
Whereas in the TV show, as they're leaving, the way that Joel looks back, because they did that same subtle thing in the show where Joel kind of subtly looks back, it reads like, if I change my ways, or if I'm maybe willing to listen to what Tess said and what Bill said in that letter, I have an opportunity maybe to have something like what Bill had one day.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a beautiful kind of comparison there.
Yeah, I thought that the way that this worked in the show was tremendously like better than the game. And not to shit on the game or anything. I mean, Neil Druckmann obviously involved in both,
Right.
but you couldn't have told this story in the medium of a video game. It's
You
just
can't.
It's a medium thing.
What would you do?
You would just be sitting there watching a cutscene for 3 hours.
Water the flowers.
Right. Yeah, and that would have got. I would have turned it off. But they just did a really good job with it, and I loved seeing that kind of whole thing. Like in the show, it was more of like showing Joel that just because they're in the situation that they're in, like there is still a life to be had.
Right.
And honestly, they arrived at the same kind of character pivot for Joel that they did in the video game, but they just did it in a way that was different and honestly worked better in the show for me.
Yeah, and you know what? It's so hard for me to say like which one is better because as you just put it, I think that one works better for the medium that is in.
Right. You couldn't have done this in the game this way.
You couldn't. And also, I don't think that you could have, like you just said, I don't think you could do what the game did exactly in that TV show. I mean, it would have been an amazing, exhilarating hour of television. But what the show was able to do with that episode 3 was something that was very unique and character driven in a way that was such a unique kind of bottle episode,
Yeah. And I refuse to call it filler. I mean, I think anybody that calls that episode filler does not understand it at all.
It just gives you, it's weird because it's like, it gives you a bigger look at the world by focusing on just 2 characters who we'll never see again in the show, but it did such a beautiful job of like expounding what this world is like. And as rough as Bill and Frank had it in episode 3, that was probably the best it could get. They probably had the best overall experience out of maybe anyone.
I want to give a shout out to Lauren, who has been on the show as well, because this episode is what convinced me to convince her to watch the show. And I said, look, this, some of this stuff is heavy. I was like, but this 3rd episode, I was like, I'm watching this. I'm sitting here sobbing into my blanket. So, like, this is just a tremendous, like, piece of art.
Yeah.
Like, fuck a piece of television. It's a tremendous piece of art. And she messaged me back after she watched it, and she also really loved it. But she was like, I wasn't sad, though, because, like, going out like they went, I mean, that's the best any of us can hope for, apocalypse or not.
Right. Yeah. People always talk about, happily ever after, but I'm like, after the credits go off, there really is no happily ever after. One of you are, unfortunately, is going to at some point, die and then most likely leave the other one there to mourn your death. But it was something else to see what it would be like. It was almost like a what if episode in comparison to the game. Like, what if Bill let himself completely trust Frank and fall for Frank, whereas in the game he remained shut off and only let Frank get so close, and that ended up driving Frank away, which physically kills Frank and just emotionally destroys Bill and leaves him as a shell of the man.
Yeah. And I think here, we got to see like the character arc for Bill. I mean, Nick Offerman ought to win.
Oh yeah,
an Emmy for this, hands down, no exceptions. But yeah, I mean, just in the show, I think the way that it turns out for him, like his greatest fear was ever having to live a day without Frank, and he never had to confront that. And I mean, in a way, like credit to Lauren again, she was right. I mean, that's there's no better way.
Yeah.
I mean, really, to go out. I mean, he says in the episode, I lived a full life.
Yeah.
This isn't some tragic suicide in a play. He was like 60 something, right? I think.
Had to have been, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, fantastic. Bravo to episode 3. You do mention the games though, so listen, for anybody who's listening, and you have not played the games and you're just watching the show, we are not going to spoil anything from the games that goes beyond the episode tonight. So anything that happened beyond episode 4 in the video game, we will not talk about until the very end. We may do a little speculation, but we'll definitely let you know before that happens. But for now, we may talk about the video game as far as comparing what happened in this episode or previous episodes, but there won't be any spoilers for anything past the TV show until way later. And we'll let you know. Ace is going to count backwards with a mouthful of water. Again.
Never again, except for Aquaman 2.
Oh, yeah, you got to do it then. So there's a running theme here, folks. As you know, if you're not, or if you listen to these every week, I am not a huge fan of the video games, which is weird because I love the show so much. However, all of my co-hosts love the video games, and so I thought I would keep this trend for tonight. Tell us a little bit about your experience with the video games.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned this because I was listening to the episode that the homie Kevin was on, and I need to call him out on this because he said his first experience was playing the game in my shitty little apartment. That was his exact quote. My apartment at the time was not shitty. It was just humble. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny when he said that. Mm-hmm. He was like, yeah, Ace was just living in a shitty apartment. I was like, by himself? Wow, that must have been great. I was like, most of us had to share that shitty apartment with someone when we had a shitty apartment.
Right. I was living in my shoebox apartment by myself.
Yeah.
But no, it was the game had came out, and it was actually like a coworker of mine who kept mentioning the game. Hey man, have you played this game yet? And here's the hype that was surrounding the game. I didn't get The Last of Us when it first came out. I wanted to, but again, I was living by myself. I was really poor at the time,
right?
And just $60 would have broken me,
right.
at that time.
Yeah, I know this feel.
Yeah, but this coworker didn't even have a PlayStation, so he couldn't even play the game. But he had heard so much about it, and he had been looking so forward to it so much. But eventually, I was able to scrounge up enough money to go ahead and pick it up. And when I played it, I'm an immersion freak, especially when it comes to my video games. I love immersion. And so when I was able to start playing that game, and immediately I just got immersed into this world, and I settled into the tone of it, and I started playing the game, and I just really never looked back. And when I know that I'm really enjoying an immersive video game, I take my time with it. Typically, single-player games like The Last of Us, even today, the playtime on those games are normally between 10 and 14 hours on average. Right. It probably took me a good 20 hours to complete my first playthrough with that game, just because I wanted to take my time with it. And
you got that, trying to get that platinum trophy. Well, it didn't exist back then.
Yeah,
right?
It didn't. I don't think it existed back then for the PS3.
No. Yeah.
But I just really wanted, because I didn't want the experience to end.
Right.
And so I just had such a great time with that game, and then from there I had to spread the good word of the gospel of The Last of Us to everyone who I could. So
I think you had probably mentioned it to me at some point,
mm-hmm.
but I think I had sold my PS3 by then because I had a PS3 for only a little amount of time. I bought it and played
God of War 3. Right.
But God of War 3, Metal Gear Solid.
Mm-hmm. 4, yep.
And then I played the remasters of God of War 1 and 2. They did a 60 frames version of the PS2 games. And then it just sat there and collected dust for I don't know how long, and then I ended up selling it. And then because Last of Us was late in the life cycle.
Very late, yeah.
So by then I had done moved on, and I was like, on about some PC Master Race nonsense probably. So yeah, that I'm still on about.
Yeah. But that hasn't changed.
No. I mean, it's because it's true. It's true. But I do have a PS5 in there for the exact same reason. Same reason I bought a PS4 as well.
Some things don't change.
Yeah, it's for God of War. So actually, I bought a PS4. I actually skipped the 4. I got the Pro when it came out.
Right.
For Horizon.
And
then I was like, oh man, there's a new God of War game and it's badass too. Oh, okay. And then I did the same thing with that game that you did with Last of Us. Like I did everything I could do because I didn't want it to be over. I didn't want to go to the end. But that's phenomenal, and I'm very happy to continue my streak of having people on who adore these video games. And I just think they're okay. The first.
So I'm not gonna push this on you because I would hate for someone to do this with me with The Last of Us Part 2. But have you thought about whenever the remake goes on like a deep sale, maybe picking it up and trying that because the combat's supposed to be a lot smoother.
Well, I have played 2.
No, I'm sorry. The remake of Last of Us 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
right, yeah.
Maybe on a deep sale. Well, actually what I will do is I will pick it up on sale on PC because it's coming out on PC.
Oh, perfect.
And so yeah, I'll be able to crank that frame rate up and all the
Right.
graphics and everything. So I don't know, man. Given my intense love of the show, I might pick up that PC version.
Yeah.
I ain't paying no $70 for it. Sony can
Yeah,
fuck off.
absolutely not. They're insane for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't endorse anyone pay $70 for that game if they already own it in some fashion.
Yeah, but I'll pay that, maybe like 35. It come down to like 35. Maybe I get a little Humble Bundle on it or something. Steam sale. I would consider it. I got Spider-Man for a really good deal. I got the Miles Morales, I think, for like $21.
Oh, nice.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
So haven't even played a second of it. Because I still haven't finished the first one.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like way into it, but
Yeah.
I got like 40 hours on that shit.
Yeah.
Because, I got to run around and do all the extra
Oh,
stuff.
absolutely.
But, yeah, so anyway, I digress. I don't want this to become a Spider-Man review. But, yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to have so many people on the show that love the games. To have that perspective.
I love one of the games.
Okay, yes. And the homie Oz from Tavern Notice Board is coming on next week. And going to hit that episode 5. You guys, since we're still on audio at the moment, you can't see it, but the studio is in a state of disrepair right now. We are in the process of some heavy upgrades, and I'm hoping that in about a week or so, I'm going to be able to show all of you the transformation that it is going through. So I am tremendously excited about that. It has consumed a lot of my time and energy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Me too, man. And there's still a bookshelf over here in the corner that's still in a box. Still got to put that son of a bitch together. So let's dig into it, man. Episode 4, The Last of Us. This one is pretty emotionally titled, Please Hold On to My Hand. What's your kind of overall thoughts on this episode, man? Because it's a huge pivot from, I think, 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, this is my least favorite episode. I still overall really enjoyed it, but it was noticeably my least favorite, at least on first viewing.
Yeah.
I think that this episode does a lot of things well. It smartly and I think purposely pivots from episode 3, because episode 3 was quite the deviation from the game. This one, they really do a good job of kind of roping in a lot more themes from the game, even the smaller things like the joke book and things of that nature, and introducing other big characters who come up in the game. But it's and we'll get into why it's my least favorite. But overall, I thought it was a solid episode. But they did some things that I don't know. I think they could have cleaned up better.
Yeah, I would kind of have to agree with that. Like, when I thought about what this show might be like before it ever came on, I was like, it's just going to be 9 episodes of the two of them wandering through the wasteland, having random fights with infected and mercenaries and shit. Because that's what the game is, but that works as a video game.
Right.
And I was like, I don't think that's going to be good for 90 minutes, much less 9 episodes of television. And this is the first episode that was like that.
Yeah.
And there had to be some of them just traveling, right? I mean, honestly, if any episode was filler, it was this one. Not saying nothing important happens, but it's like, in the overall theme of the show, I would not consider last week's episode to be filler. I would consider this week's episode to be filler. I'm not saying that it is, but I'm just saying if one of these 4 is going to be, it's this one. Because it's a bridge. I mean,
You're right.
You're getting from one place to another. And I think it sets up the next episode to maybe be stellar. And that's fine in television. I mean, you weren't going to follow up last week with anything, right? I mean, nothing was going to stand up to that. So I really think that they played it smart this week, but I got to agree with you. This is my least favorite episode of the show. And I'm really glad I have somebody who's familiar with the games on, because I'm pretty lost in terms of who half of these people were. So we get Joel and Ellie. They're still in the truck. my favorite parts of the episode were at the beginning when they're just in the truck and they're just traveling together. And you can tell while they're in the forest and everything, and Ellie's like, these people aren't going to find us, right? And they're doing the foreshadowing excellently. A lot, and I don't want to sidebar us, but I'm gonna. One thing that I really tend to hate in media these days is this, like, and this is in all mediums, where people will be like, "Oh, well, I saw this coming," and like that's a negative thing. And it's like not everything has to be a shock,
Right.
and like the concept of foreshadowing is a literary tool. Mm-hmm. You use it to set something up. So, of course, if you're a fucking intelligent adult who's seen hundreds of thousands of hours of content like most of us have, and she goes, are there bad people out here? Are they going to find us? And he's like, no, nobody's going to find us. They're going to encounter some people out there.
Right.
But it works because it's a good setup. It's him explaining to her, like, look, there's bad people out here. We're not worried about infected out here. We're worried about humans. And this episode, I think, did a tremendous job of Ellie trying to, I keep wanting to call her Bella by her actual name, of Ellie basically being like, oh, who are these people affiliated with? And Joel's like, they're people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a tremendous, like, insight into the way Joel views the world, and as like there are people out there that aren't good people, and he knows that because he isn't and doesn't consider himself to be good people. I don't think.
Yeah, and what is the definition of a good person in that type of world?
Right.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about how a lot of people could potentially dislike this episode because it is too quote unquote predictable or something of the sort. And for that, I have to say that there is not everything has to subvert expectations, and because more times than not in today's media, the subversion lets us down. Like, it's okay if our expectations are met.
Right.
Somewhere along the lines that got lost.
It really did. I agree entirely.
But I really dug the tension of that whole setup with Ellie asking Joel, "Are there bad people out here? Will anyone find us?" And then we see like sometime into the night, Joel is actually standing up, keeping guard, and after he tried to assure Ellie that no one's coming. It's little moments like that I really dig, because it goes to show it's the idea of telling us without telling us.
Right.
That's why I really like stuff like that.
Yeah. And I loved Joel in this episode because it did show like how prepared he is and how knowledgeable he is about the world, and like why this is not the story of some everyman luckily transporting this girl across the world or whatever, the country. Like Marlene placed her very knowingly into Joel's hands, knowing that like if you're gonna fuck with anybody, like this ain't the guy.
Right.
So
how do you feel about this technically being the first episode that doesn't start with a flashback to like day zero?
I think it's interesting. I think day zero is of great interest to everybody, me included.
Yeah.
I think one of the best scenes in the show, if not the best scene in the show, is the opening to episode 2 with the scientist in Jakarta. She killed. She was fantastic. And just the way that whole thing played out, where it was like, oh, you need to bomb the city. It was straight to logic, no emotion. Because she's a woman of science.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm not happy about this, but if there's going to be any hope for humanity, you have to kill everyone in the city right now. And it didn't work.
It didn't work at all.
They had already shipped out the grain.
Yeah, it's way too late. And smarter people than me on Reddit had already figured this part out that I thought was still really interesting about episode 2, and that is apparently like one of the world's biggest like grain or flour supplier comes from Jakarta.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
It is the largest flour mill on Earth.
That's insanity. But yeah, so I thought that was really interesting too, and I really dug that opening to episode 2. It didn't bug me, but it did made me kind of chuckle a little bit when she said "bomb the city," because I was like, we going straight to this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, she knows. She
Yeah.
knows that there's no treatment or anything for this that can be developed.
Yeah. It's not very often where we get situations where the scientific expert is actually filled in on all the details. In most cases, the military man is like very withholding of information,
Right.
And then they refuse. They won't even ask like, "What do you think is the proper approach?" And if they do ask, then they don't listen.
Right.
But that's a very big call, a very big ask of that researcher.
Yeah.
So, and we can assume that didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, maybe they could have bombed the city.
I guess they could. It wouldn't have mattered ultimately.
Yeah, because
right?
all the
Yeah.
grain would have been shipped out already.
Yeah.
So they may have slowed the spread of the disease in like Indonesia or whatever. But if all that, like, think about how much wheat is in everything. I mean,
Right.
They was trying to tell us, man, about the damn gluten.
Yeah.
So, and we still don't know if any of these people's dicks flew off. So
That's a mystery that you and Kevin started that I don't have to be around to find out.
I'm just saying, man. But I think it's also very interesting. A lot of people probably have been looking into this as well. Is scientifically and realistically here in our world, we have hundreds of antibiotics to the point where we barely make new ones anymore because we have so many. There's only 3 antifungals, period, because the biology of fungus is so similar to ours,
Right.
that it's hard to make medicine that harms it and not us. And so it's very like the show, like out of all the like zombie apocalypse, of different forms in the media, this is the one that's closest to science.
Yeah. It is, and I think that's kind of what makes it a little bit terrifying to a different degree. You can watch Walking Dead and be terrified of the situation or what you would do or be forced to do, but at the end of the episode, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Something like this, and it's like, I'm not saying that it could happen, but the chances are greater in comparison to other post-apocalyptic scenarios.
Right.
I had one more question for you, actually, that I was really curious to get your thoughts on, and then that is like the show is much bigger in scope than the game is. The game is purposely a very small and intimate, personal setting
Right.
between two characters. But the show has given us so much more about the world as a whole. Do you think that there have been other people immune to the virus besides Ellie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think and I don't know if this necessarily would apply to fungi as much as it does to like bacteria, things like that. But in terms of like a virus, also, about 10% of the population is immune to anything, right? So, and not the same things, right? Like so. Like 10% of the population is immune to poison ivy. I'm one of those people. I can bathe in it. It doesn't bother me at all. But I'm not immune to fucking C19 or like
Right.
any of that shit. You know what I mean? I called that shit a couple times. Like, and I'm not, like, so there are people in our society that are probably immune to AIDS. There's been people that have gotten it and not died.
Right.
Also Magic Johnson.
Magic Johnson. Yeah.
He's gonna outlive us all. There's like 10% of the population. Just about anything is going to be, around that amount of the population is going to be immune to it. So, I think that it's possible there's other people like Ellie. But the thing is, like, what's the likelihood of those people being discovered in this setting?
Right.
Because if you come up red, Fedra's going to kill you.
Fedra's going to kill you. And I was going to bring that up because, like, what do you do if you're Fedra? You can't necessarily blame them for...
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, for killing the infected. But also, how jacked up is it that, like, their potential cure, they could be, offing. They could have done it dozens of times and not even know it.
Yeah.
But it's like, do you really want to run that risk? You don't have a lot of room for failed experimental procedures.
Right.
What are you going to do? You're just gonna wait for every person to turn and then, kill them. So it's a very interesting proposition, and it's got to be something that Fedra has talked about within the realms of this TV show to a degree. But yeah, There's got to be more out there too. That's what I was thinking. But the fact that they found one that Fedra hasn't actively killed yet, yeah.
Well, and it's also too, like Tess said, being immune doesn't protect you from being ripped apart.
Yeah.
It doesn't protect you from being shot by someone else.
Right.
A clicker ain't gonna give a shit.
Right.
Like, okay, whatever. I bit you, didn't turn. Okay, well, I'm just gonna rip you to pieces.
Yeah.
A bloater ain't gonna give a fuck. Like,
no.
So, I think that that is definitely it's a low possibility to find someone. And you're bringing up Fedra, and I don't want to keep going back to episode 3, but that fucking comment was so funny when he's like, and you think the government are all Nazis or whatever. He's like, the government are all Nazis. He's like, yeah, now, but not then.
It's got to be. It would have to be hell having a political argument of any kind with a prepper in that scenario, because you can't convince them that they're wrong, because in so many ways they are right.
Yeah, they were correct. Yeah. You know what, man? I bet after that episode, they're like those websites and stuff, not a sponsor, that sell like 2,000 days of food or whatever.
Right.
I bet they made a fuck ton of money after that episode.
Oh yeah, 100%. Most definitely.
Everybody's like, yeah, man, I got to go buy like a year worth of food, non-perishable food that I can.
Yeah, you can just try to live off of. Listen, there's so much that you have to do. You won't be prepared. Like, I don't mean to down anybody.
Yeah, unless you like Bill,
Yeah.
Hey, man, I'll be honest. I looked at one of those sites myself, not because I was actually going to buy it. I was just like curious, but it's like not that expensive. You can get like a year worth of food for like $1,500.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I was like, dang, man, that's not bad at all. That's like breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks.
Right. But
not a sponsor.
Looking at Bill's setup though, he had like a basement beneath the basement, and he had like hidden security cameras, and he had like a wall of John Wick guns.
And knew how to use them.
Knew how to use them. Not today, you jackboot fucks.
Yeah, I loved that. So this episode, man, we get into Joel and Ellie. They're traveling in the truck. They get to Kansas City. I think that's where they were at. They see the roadblock. I thought that was a setup, but they kind of swerved us on that, which this show's pretty good at.
They followed the game very closely for like the first half of the episode in particular.
Right.
From the joke book to even Ellie finding the porn mag that belonged to Bill, and like they even quoted the game directly several times there. And I'm like, out of all the things for you guys to quote directly, you guys pulled this moment. And so when they got to the blockade in Kansas City, I was like, this isn't a setup. There's got to be a guy who jumps out asking for help. And that's exactly what they did.
Right.
And like there's some things, like they said in one of the behind the scenes interview, I think it was Neil Druckmann, and he said, in reference to episode 3, but the show as a whole, he said, can we do it better? If so, we go with that. If not, we stick with the game.
Right.
And I think that with some of the themes here, that's kind of what they did. They saw that it was very effective in the game. Let's just kind of stick with that.
That's a tremendous way to go about doing an adaptation.
It's a very egoless way to go about it, to admit that there's a better way to do it and then to do it. So here's to hoping for Last of Us 2 being a good season of television.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we definitely, I want to talk about that at the end, as I did with Kevin and Stan too. It's like, definitely want to talk about it at the end, because we now know we got a season 2 renewal.
Yes.
And so yeah, at the end, we can talk a little spoilery. We'll go into what might happen in a potential season 2. So everything after they get ambushed, I loved the gunfight during the ambush. I thought it was. I liked that they didn't go full on Hollywood shootout.
Yeah.
Right away. Obviously, that's probably going to happen later. Mm-hmm. But I love that they kept it really subtle here and really raw, because other than like the guys clearly wasting a bunch of ammo, but like they're not trained soldiers.
No.
These are just guys that were given a weapon and told like, go out here and scavenge, procure us some food, protect the town, etc. From the game, so like, who are these guys that? Like, is there a direct game comparison to this group that?
So, from my recollection, no.
Okay.
Like they're just a group of, it's like Joe said, they're just survivors, but they seem much more organized and militarized in the show.
Okay.
So they kind of feel like, someone, but they're not Fedra, they're not Fireflies. So it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I had a moment in the show where I was like, who are all these people?
Yeah.
I was like, Ace will know.
Yeah, and I don't.
Okay, so this is just kind of a faction that is somewhat made up. Now, Henry, of course, is from the game.
Yes.
And maybe this is just a way for them to properly intro Henry.
I think so. I think instead of like, Henry maybe just expositing information, we actually kind of get more, which the show has done a great job of doing.
Yeah, I mean, from the show, it seems like there actually was an uprising here against Fedra, and they succeeded.
Right.
But it seems like these guys are just Fedra 2.0 with less organization.
Yeah.
I mean, they already got a guy locked in a cell. They executed him with no due process whatsoever, just because they were pissed off.
Right.
And it's like they're now hunting down these people who they feel have wronged them or whatever. And successful societies typically aren't built on top of malicious bloodshed for no reason other than your own anger. So.
Yeah, there's something about collapsed society that has a hard time with that notion.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna step out on a limb here. I'm used to being alone with like kind of rogue ideas about or rogue takes on certain media. But the thing about this episode that didn't stick well with me were certain moments that were supposed to stand out as really big and bold moments for me. So Ellie shooting the guy and saving Joel, obviously again that's a very big moment from the video game. I love Bella Ramsey, and I think that she's a tremendous Ellie. So with all the still Bill's line from all the jackboot assholes on the internet. I don't know what they're going on about. I think that she's killing it. But one limitation that I think that she has isn't in her ability. I think it's in the writing. And it's very small and subtle things, but the way that Ellie is portrayed or written in this show is almost like she's already Ellie from maybe the end of this story.
Right.
And I'm like, the way that she's behaving isn't quote unquote wrong, but I'm like, we have to get there.
Right.
And so I'm like, what are we going to do when we get to that point if you're already there? And it seems like she's more emotionally stable, even more so than Joel. And I'm like, this is really throwing me for a loop here where I'm like, one of you should be kind of overreacting and the other one of you should be the more composed of the two. But it almost feels like the roles are switched here. And it's throwing me for a loop. I have to watch the episode again, obviously. But that's kind of where I'm at with some of the things that's throwing me off right now.
The way I interpreted that scene, and I did think that there was something kind of odd about it, like where it's just like, it feels like they unnecessarily rushed to the next scene. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure I love the direction there. And let me explain what I mean. So the guy's on top of Joel. He's choking him with the shotgun. She's got the gun. And originally I thought she was going to stab him. I thought that she was going to change it up and like maybe not reveal she had the gun yet. She was going to like stab him in the neck or whatever. But she takes the gun out and shoots him. And I do want to point out that at the angle she shot him at, it's entirely possible the bullet would have gone through him and hit Joel. And I was like, what the fuck?
Right.
I was like, just shoot him in the back of the head. Like, he doesn't know you're there. Just point blank. But,
Right.
She's never shot a gun before, possibly.
14-year-old kid.
Yeah. So, I'm like, okay, whatever. This is why we don't let little kids run around with handguns. I think, the guy did a tremendous job of like, holy fuck, like you really felt the emotion there of like, you don't want to kill this guy, but you definitely can't let him live.
Right.
It's just a terrible fucking situation to be in. And I think we get that moment where Joel is like panicking, like, she's not ready to be in this situation. And you see that expression on Bella's face where it is fucking with her. Like, she's acting it out like she's processing it. But the way I gathered in the show is it's like from her facial expression, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, is it's like she realizes this is a horrible situation, and she also feels like she should be more affected by it. Is kind of how I felt here. And yeah, I agree with you. It's almost as if she is already really hardened.
Right.
When we meet her in the very first episode.
Right.
As far as the people saying that Bella Ramsey's not fucking incredible, like, yeah, I don't know what their issue is. I mean,
Yeah.
they did you guys want Elliot Page? Because like,
That-
other than short of that,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
I don't know what you were gonna do, and I don't give a shit what you say. That original character model was definitely based on them. Like,
It was.
yeah,
I mean, they changed it for crying out loud.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, they were straight up like, it's not, for years, and then they were like, all right, we're just gonna subtly change this real quick. Get out of here.
Right. You know, just to kind of compare that a little bit with how it played out in the video game, you know, is Joel is you know, being bested by one of these militiamen or mercenaries, whatever you want to call them, and Ellie, she does pull the trigger, but it kills the guy in the
Right.
game, and you know, I think the reason why I liked it so much in the game is because it kind of served two purposes. For one, it was a moment for Ellie because like it was almost surreal for her, and she even says something like, "I shot the shit out of that guy." It's something that is supposed to be kind of a moment of levity and humor to the player, but for the character, you know, something that's pretty heavy. And she's almost kind of stunned at what happens here. And for Joel, it's a moment where he begins to gain trust for Ellie. And you know, this when he, you know, says, "Okay, so I'm gonna let you hold on to this gun after you've been begging for one this whole time." And we do kind of get that a little moment in this episode. But again, it was just I don't know, like I don't know if it's because of the placement of the scenes, if they didn't flow together properly for me, but it just felt like it didn't convey the same type of message or proper camaraderie that would kind of make sense as a lead up for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I definitely don't like how that whole kind of thing played into the show. Like, that particular scene, like everything after the initial gunfight, I thought was a little wonky. And not to say it was bad.
No.
It just wasn't up to the level of, and the same thing goes for the episode, really. It's not bad TV. It's just not on the level of, like, the first 3 episodes, all of which I consider to be, I mean, above a 9 out of 10. I mean, I think I gave the first episode a 10, and I think episode 2, I think I gave it like a 9.5 or something like that, and then 3, I think I like a 9.7.
Right.
So I mean, it's a stellar TV show, but it's just that this episode, like, I can't name you a television show that has, you know, 10 episodes of just absolute stellar television.
Right.
House of the Dragon didn't pull that off.
Yeah.
I mean, Game of Thrones in no season, like season 4 is my favorite season, and it doesn't pull it off at any point. My favorite show of all time, The Shield. I can't name a season that I think that every single episode is just, you know, knock it out of the park, because you just can't do it that way.
Right.
If you think about a season of television as a story, like, no book is a banger on every single page.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, and it would be an oxymoron if it were, because it would lose its savor.
Right.
It wouldn't have the same impact. That's why those quiet moments are so necessary. And again, I think that's why they went for a more loud and bombastic episode for season 4 episode 4 to contrast with episode 3.
Yeah.
You know.
Because they knew that it was going to set the internet on fire.
Oh,
in both
yeah.
a good and bad way. So I absolutely, you know, loved the last episode. And this episode, like I said, these parts of it were wonky. We go from here, we get introduced to, I don't know if they ever even said her name in the show.
Kathleen?
Yeah, Kathleen. And did they say it in the show?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she's, I guess, the leader of this little group. But it almost immediately came off to me that she's just kind of like manipulating them. Like, she's like a cult leader, kind of. You know?
It did feel that way. And man, I wish that her moments with the doctor had more time to breathe.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I was focusing too hard on trying to catch up with the exposition and trying to figure out their scenario, and that I couldn't really be impacted by what they were saying.
Right. And like I said, this is a short episode.
Yeah, it's 50 minutes, right?
Yeah. And that for this show is short, especially because that's including like all the stuff HBO puts at the beginning
Right.
and the credits and all that. So it's probably only 42 minutes of meat.
Yeah, when the
And-
credits started rolling, I was like, "Oh, wow!"
Yeah. It's almost like maybe this is like a part 1, part 2, kind of next week. We're just used to being able to sit with these characters for longer servings. But I immediately got the instance of like, okay, she hates this Henry guy because he narked on her brother to Fedra. Okay, so now everything that befalls the town, everything that bad that happens, this is Henry.
Right.
Like these people show up dead, and she's immediately like, "Oh,
It's
Henry
gotta be
called
him."
some guys in."
Right.
Like she's stoking their, she's creating a great other to focus them on. Which if you're going to be a dictator, that's smart.
That is the way to go.
It's worked for all the other
I
ones.
was gonna say, yeah, another oxymoron for all the other great dictators.
Yeah. They all kind of played this route, so
All right. Yeah. No, I was go ahead.
No, I thought that she was great in the role that they had her for. I'm with you though. I would have liked to have seen more time with the doctor.
Yeah. Because they established that there is some type of relationship there. He says, "I delivered you." So, I mean, like if I don't even know if the doctor who delivered me is still alive, but if they are, there's no real ties there. Like I need a little bit more.
Right. Yeah.
You could be lying to me for all I know.
Right. Yeah. I wasn't really there.
Right.
I don't remember.
Could have been anybody's baby.
At first, I thought he might have been like a priest or some shit. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't talking about like serious, like he was maybe metaphorically talking about
Right.
deliverance, but no, like he's like, I pulled you out your mom's vagina, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, why do you think she chose to kill him? Because a doctor's got to be like a hot commodity in this scenario.
I know. I think that she did it purely out of rage. Like I think that guy that she was like, "Is there anything worth? Can we save him or whatever?" And they were like, "There's no chance." I think she maybe had a connection with that person because she immediately walks in there and kills him, and I think she just does it out of blind rage. Because
Yeah.
I'm with you. A doctor has to be a hot fucking commodity.
Yes.
In this day and age. I mean, I don't get me wrong. I guess access to like medicines and shit is probably pretty scarce too. But it's like, dude, you can't like, you got to think like how far humanity got set back by the fact that you can't fucking Google anything.
Right.
You can't be like, oh, I got a fever and a cough. Let me go on WebMD.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's none of that.
Right.
Like, you pretty much got set back to the 1800s medically.
Yeah, and that's again got to be terrifying.
Right.
And like even like the lack of what is now considered basic technology for medicine, like MRI machines.
Yeah.
Just okay, let's get you in this machine real quick, 30 minutes. Okay, so here's the problem here. It's not, pancreatic cancer. It's actually you just have a blockage right here. You take this medicine and it'll clear it up.
Yeah.
They don't have that luxury now. So having a doctor who can keenly, recognize symptoms at least is a great start.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, just think about like if we didn't have penicillin.
Oh,
okay?
my gosh.
All right, we don't have access to any. All right, well, we got to amputate that leg then. What?
What?
Yeah, I mean, that's the situation we're in, And, it's, for her to do that, I mean, damn, that's crazy. If they don't address that in some way, then that's a major plot hole for me. Because I get it if you're just unreasonable. Well, you can't tell me not any of those people was like, did that bitch just kill a doctor?
Right.
Like,
Seriously. Yeah, so we how'd you feel about like the bonding process that we see begin to happen between Joel and Ellie?
I thought it was done really well in this episode. It was one of the highlights for me because we all know that we're going to start to see that between them, but we really don't see it until this episode. Like, and even when they're in the car, Joel, I love the subtle differences. In almost every episode, he calls her Cargo.
Yeah.
Because that's what Tess first called her in the first episode. And the way he says it changes over time. In this one, he's not telling her that she's Cargo. He's trying to convince himself that she's Cargo.
Yes.
He says, "You're Cargo." And he's trying to tell himself, to convince himself of that fact. But we already know that that's not the case. Like, the bonding moments already exist with her. You know, he's already used to having her around. And we start to see that relationship kind of grow, and he has a definite soft spot for her, especially when she gets put in danger. Because Joel is a protector, as Bill said in his note.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Man, on like I guess a softer note, it would also really piss me off in that scenario. Like, you know, because you got to think, man, you get to Bill's compound and you just get to raid, you know what I mean? And you have access to all of Bill's stuff. And now in a matter of what, less than 2 days, you lose it all, essentially. Like, that would be infuriating.
They didn't even have time to process that, really.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they had a great setup. They had a truck. They had all of Bill's stuff. Like, they were fully loaded. And then now the people that are hunting them have access to all of that shit. And you just lost most of your supplies. And now you got a rifle and whatever was in Ellie's pack.
Yeah. And that's about it. So long, Chef Boyardee.
Yeah. And like, they were scraping by our standards.
Yeah.
And now they're really in trouble.
Right. I think that I also really liked how this episode did begin to have that bonding process between the two. I mean, it had to happen this episode because there's 5 episodes left, so approximately 5 to 6 hours tops, of material. So the bonding process has to happen now. And again, like, for the most part, I did really dig it. It was just the off moments for the characters for me that kind of caused it to not sit with me as well as it should have. Yeah. So I acknowledge what they're doing, and I'm glad they're doing it. But man, like, I wish there was a place for Ellie to progress to, and also for Joel as well. Like, I think it's okay if he begins to soften up, but remains hardened for another episode or two. But neither here nor there, I suppose, at this point.
Yeah. 2 things before we score this one. What do you think's under the building in there that caused such distress for Kathleen?
So that is an excellent question, because it seemed like the floor is almost breathing. The optimist in me, or the hopeful part of me, wants to think that it's a bloater that's under there. But the way that it was moving, it's got to be like a huge, I almost said a huge collection of spores, when I'm like, they're not in the game. I mean, in the TV show. So yeah, I really can't think of what, in terms of the TV show, could be causing that kind of movement like that. So I'm just going to stick with the bloater for now, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hope we get a bloater in the show, because that would be amazing.
Yeah.
They already did such a good job with the clickers.
Oh, they're great.
Yeah, I mean, that was tremendous. So I think it's probably just a big strand of cordyceps, like they talked about in episode 2, where like some of them grow out like a mile.
Well, yeah.
I think that's probably just what it is. It's a big strand of like cordyceps, and so it's going to start growing out of the ground around them.
Yeah.
Which means that the whatever horde or whatever is nearby, because it's a city, so there has to be one, is going to know about their location. And I think this may be a lead into like the big horde of clickers we get earlier in the game already at this point. We'll see how that goes. Other question I have for you: how did you like the ending, the last scene of the episode? Did you think that it was a good call to end it on like a cliffhanger like that, or?
I mean, so was it a cliffhanger? It's like, even if you haven't played the video game, you know that Joel and Ellie can't technically be in any kind of serious danger. We still have 5 episodes left.
Right.
I guess it's a cliffhanger in the sense of, if you just see the TV show, you don't know who these people are.
Right.
And you don't know what they're about. So I think that in terms of like mild curiosity, they ended on a good note. But in terms of like, it didn't hit me with that emotional gut punch of episode 3. And like you said earlier, not every episode can do that. but it also didn't leave me with that sense of awe that like episodes 1 or 2 did at the end.
Right.
This was kind of like, you know what it felt like? If we were watching it on cable, it almost felt like a commercial break.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So.
Agreed. For some of you out there used to be this thing called cable, and there'd be commercials in the middle of the show. Yeah, it was really annoying. I agree. Like we can talk in the video game spoiler section about like what's going to come next, but I thought it was a definitely a way to leave people wanting more. Mm-hmm. Right? Was it a great like ending? It didn't leave me with anything like the other 3 episodes did. So it left me with anticipation. Yep. Which, if that's the only emotion you got, then mm-hmm. go for it. It's something, right? It's not. You never want to leave them with meh. Like, like okay, well I'll watch the next episode if I feel like it.
Right.
You never want to leave them with that. It's the worst thing you could do. So what do you score this one out of 10, man? Put you in the hot seat.
I give it an 8.
Okay.
I think that for me, like this is a solid 8. So again, definitely not a bad episode. And even the moments of the episode that I said I didn't like, in the grand scheme of things, if the rest of the show is great, then these are very mild. But if they're exacerbated, then these things could potentially worsen. I thought that, again, the look of the show, which we haven't really talked about, it looks fantastic.
Right. The set design,
yes.
You almost don't realize it. And the sound design, too,
right.
is incredible.
It is. Like, and I love like the choice of music that they use. I love the whole aesthetic of the show. And again, like I love that they presented a sense of danger that weren't clickers. Right. And again, like a lot of people out there have watched a lot of Walking Dead, and so they're very familiar with the zombies aren't the real threat out there; it's the people. But to get it done in a series that is more, I guess, more grounded and does it better. Right. It's very well received for me. So there's a lot about this episode that I liked. But for all the aforementioned things that we mentioned already, it's definitely not my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, like, I was leaning like 7.5 for this mm-hmm. one, but you almost convinced me, like, because I mean, that is true. When you're looking at something with such a high production value, and it doesn't matter the medium on that, you start to like lose your appreciation for that. Like you play a video game, like like I play a lot of COD. Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks beautiful. Yeah. It's one of the most beautiful video games ever because they got like 11 development teams working on the shit. And it's easy to lose sight of that,
right?
Because you're like, okay, well I'm just playing the game and like I'm judging it based off of this. Is it just COD like they all are? Yeah, pretty much. But it's just like the production value is so high, you forget that like. You're watching like House of the Dragon. Mm-hmm. It's like it's very easy to be like, oh, some dialogue was off here and there, but it's just like there's like a $2 million set here. These motherfuckers just built a castle,
right? And
it's like you have to appreciate the production value that goes into this stuff. HBO is one of the best shows doing it.
Yes,
and if you don't believe that. Go and look at the set design for, and I hate to keep shitting on this, go look at the set design for Wheel of Time, right? Everyone looks like they're on their way to con, right? Nobody's clothes look ruffled or they just came out at the
looks too clean.
It's all clean.
Yeah.
Their set design for Rings of Power was considerably better, but they spent $700 million on it. And it still doesn't, I think, come off as well as this or like House of the Dragon does. House of the Dragon looked better just from a production value point. I think was better than Rings of Power, and it cost half.
Right.
So I think HBO is like the best in the TV game right now when it comes to this sort of stuff.
I think so too. Because while you were talking, I was thinking about like the competition. And it was like I feel that like if Marvel wasn't so stretched thin, they'd be strong contenders. But they're extremely stretched out, so like their VFX departments are, they're kind of getting beat up.
Well, even with like WandaVision though, and Falcon Winter Soldier, I wasn't a huge fan of Falcon and Winter Soldier, but the set design and stuff was still great.
Oh, yeah.
The production value, you would think you were watching a cat movie.
Yeah, that's very
until
true.
they started speaking.
Netflix never really kind of had that kind of production value with anything.
Yeah, most of House of Cards was in an office or whatever.
Right.
Um,
Stranger Things is
an exception though.
Yeah.
For that. I mean, Stranger Things set design was great.
It is,
but only in like the later seasons, like season 3 and 4. In season 1 and 2, it was like, okay, that's a couple houses in Atlanta. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Upside Down always looked really good, but in those seasons, we don't see a lot of our characters there.
Right.
You just see a lot of like CG kind of renders of it, whereas like in the later seasons, they like the characters have to like go there and stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think I'd say this later season of Stranger Things had great design.
Oh yeah, but it kind of had to. You know?
But that's only after it became like the biggest thing they had.
Right. Yeah.
But like, I mean, other big Netflix shows.
You look at like The Witcher. I think The Witcher would be like a fantastic comparison in terms of like, scope. It's this big fantasy setting. I really like the look of it, and again, I like that they feel kind of dirty. I like the fact that Henry Cavill, at times, quite literally, is dirty.
Yeah.
I think that kind of adds to it, but even that, it doesn't come off like a House of the Dragon or even a Last of Us.
Right. Yeah. HBO's killing it, man. They've
Yeah.
always been. I mean, they've always been premium TV.
Oh yeah.
So even all the way back to The Wire.
Yeah, I was gonna say you go back to like the late '90s.
Yeah.
And they've been killing it since then.
Yeah. So The Wire was fucking incredible. I really need to go back and watch the remaster of that show because
I need to watch it to begin with. I've never seen The Wire. Confession.
This man's never seen The Shield or The Wire, and these are not arguably the two best police dramas. Period. Like they are easily the best two, and for different reasons, entirely. Like The Wire is much more of a political messaging type show, whereas The Shield is much more of a character study, which is why I think you'll like it more.
Yeah.
But yeah, both incredible fucking shows. Not a sponsor. HBO also not a sponsor. So now that we've wrapped it up, this is where we're going to get into the spoiler territory. So if you've only watched a show, you have not played the games at all, thanks for joining us. You might want to fuck off and come back next week for sure. However, now we're going to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of it here. So you have been warned. This is it. Final chance. That is Sam at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Henry and Sam.
Yeah. Well, we don't see Henry, right?
No, we see them both.
Oh, we see them
because
both? Okay.
Henry is standing over Ellie, and then Sam is the one who's pointed the gun at Joel.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah. All right. So this is Henry and Sam. So what's your prediction for where we're going to go in episode 5?
Episode 5, thematically speaking, should be one of the best episodes of the season because if they follow the story like I assume they would, it's going to be action and very heavy on the drama because, again, we already said spoiler alert. The theme, or like, I'm not going to spoil what happens here, but it's very tragic.
Right.
It's a very tragic story, as you guys could probably guess. But there's also like so much that we get in terms of like action set pieces. And now some of you may be thinking, well, episode 3 thematically should have been a giant action set piece. That's when we get like our first bloater, technically, and that's when we get like. I think that's when we get Joel hanging upside down and caught in one of Bill's traps. That's when we get like crazy moments like that again work in a video game and not in a TV show. But the difference, I think, is this. I think that HBO probably knows that like an episode like episode 3 is lightning in a bottle. And they also know that they can't afford to do another episode like that because they have a story to tell, like a bigger narrative to get to. And so I think that we're gonna get this episode with these 4 characters, and I think that for the viewers who aren't familiar with the games, and who allow themselves to be so invested in the TV show, they are going to think that we're going to get more of these four characters than we are.
Right.
And I think that they're going to be heartbroken by the conclusion.
Yeah.
But I think along the way to get there, it's going to be a lot of heart pumping, kind of like a adrenaline type of tension and action that we get to get there.
Yeah, I would not be surprised at all if, I mean, I think leaving episode 5, I think out of everyone we saw alive tonight, Joel and Ellie are probably going to be the only ones that make it out of there.
Yeah.
I think that whole community is going to be completely overrun.
I think so too. Like your idea of like there being like just a giant, nest of those like communication tendrils or whatever they were called, like those Cordyceps telephone lines.
Yeah.
Like I think that that's gonna just completely ruin that area.
Yeah.
And there probably won't be anyone left.
Yeah.
So.
It's going to be interesting, man. Season 2, what can we say we haven't already said about season 2? But do you think, based on what you've seen, do you think they will make significant changes?
I think so. And that's the only reason why, like, I'm mildly optimistic for season 2. I've made it no secret that I have no love for the sequel. Yes, I understand the theme that they're going for. It is not lost on me. I get it. It's just not for me. Kevin, I think, put it damn near perfectly when he said that The Last of Us Part 1 is about love and hope. He hit the nail on the head with that.
Agreed.
And The Last of Us Part 2, he says about hate. And I would take it a step further and say it's about the cycle of violence, but it's more so about the cycle of pointless violence.
Right.
And
I would say that, like, vengeance would be a key theme there, you know. But yeah, I mean, the way that you put it too, like the cycle of like pointless just violence. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's just a harder story to tell. And with how divisive the game was for certain decisions that they take, listen, if you guys, Neil Druckmann and the other showrunner, the guy who made Chernobyl, tremendous show, like if you guys thought that the game was divisive, that the internet blew up over the game, if you guys don't make significant changes to how certain events play out, you're going to get that times a million.
Right.
People love this show,
Yeah.
and they will tune in to see every single bit of season 2. And when certain things happen, if they happen exactly how they happen in the video game, it's going to be the same thing, but just to a higher degree.
Do you think they will go so far as to keep Joel alive until the end of season 2?
I think that's a mistake,
Okay.
but maybe. But Neil Druckmann, I just said earlier that the man seems to have his ego in check because of the changes being made. He's always come across as very defensive with The Last of Us Part 2, though.
Yeah. But I mean, they can't kill Pedro Pascal off in the first episode of season 2.
You don't think so?
I mean, I think if they do, I think HBO will try to stop them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think your viewer numbers are going to tank.
Yeah.
Because most of that game, when you are with Ellie, is just her.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Bella Ramsey running around alone makes for great television. I mean,
You're right. The other issue is this, as I promise you, because I have this much faith in season 1 of this show, as we're going to see in episode 5, we're going to get more characters, just like Bill and Frank, who are very well fleshed out and who are very intelligent in their own ways and feel like people. The problem with The Last of Us Part 2 is that the entire game consists of idiots and assholes.
Right.
And there's no in between.
Right.
And that, unfortunately, even includes Ellie. And I hate that.
Yeah.
And so they're gonna have to make significant changes to how events play out, to how characters react and their themes and their motives. They're gonna have to give people a reason to care. And one of the hardest things about The Last of Us Part 2 is that you spend, after a certain event takes place, you proceed to spend almost half the game as a new protagonist. And
Also not going to work.
it's gonna be way harder in TV because at least with a video game, you can sit down and play through it. With the TV show, you're gonna have to sit week after week spending time watching this character who, I mean, you guys aren't gonna like this character.
Yeah, your use of the word protagonist was interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, right? And I'm actually giving Neil Druckmann more credit than he deserves for that.
Yeah, I'm like, let me go back and look at my notes from our What is a Protagonist episode.
Yeah,
You know.
they are a protagonist in like the strictly literal sense in the way that they are the character who we follow and who the story unfolds through. So we technically, in that regard, have two protagonists in The Last of Us Part 2. And and it's supposed to be like this big emotional climax at the end where we're supposed to feel conflicted with what's going on. I never felt that.
Right.
And I feel that I was robbed of an opportunity at the end of The Last of Us Part 2.
There absolutely should have been a player choice, I think, at the end of both games.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it 100% should have been a player choice to do one thing or the other. And I
Yes.
get this idea that this is not Skyrim, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not creating, your adventurer to go out and do a thing. But what you are doing is you're putting somebody in the role of a character and you're saying this is this character's story. But there's a level of player agency that is implied.
Yeah.
And when you're making a choice like that, I think the gamer should have had the choice to either leave or to kill everyone as in the first game,
Right.
You should have had that choice to go, well, this is what is for humanity, whatever.
Yeah.
It's fine if you want to. You don't have to Mass Effect the second game and base everything off of what the player chose. You can say this is the canon choice of what happened.
Right.
Other games have done that, not a problem. But just straight rip the choice from you. And the same thing with episode 2 is I would have loved to do like a God of War 3-esque thing where you can just beat Abby until
Right.
there's nothing left to hit.
Yeah.
And I think people would have. Well, I know why they didn't give you that choice because that's what just about everyone would have picked.
You took the words from my mouth. You're
like, I never would have seen the other
Never
ending.
seen the other end. Yeah. It's kind of like the developers of Mass Effect, how they said that they actually see the player data and they know what the players chose, and they said that vast majority of the players chose certain options over the other, but they still at least gave the players that option anyway.
Right.
I think it would have broken Neil Druckmann's heart to see that 99.99% of players chose to just demolish Abby.
Yeah.
But I think that other than what we just mentioned, another one of my biggest complaints about the sequel is the fact that at the end of the first game, one reason why it's so beloved is because we get two amazing characters who we see their journey play out, and then there's this discussion to be had at the end. Did Joel do the right thing?
Right.
And it's such a discussion to be had because you can see it from both angles.
Right.
I think most practical people can see it from both sides, and that makes for incredible discussion. In the sequel, they take that away from the player,
Right.
and you don't get to make that decision anymore. You don't get to have that discussion. It's already been settled, and I think that it is a little bit of an artistic robbery because you gave us that, but then for the sequel, you decide that you are going to take that discussion, that agency away from the player and say that, no, this is the way that it is.
Right.
And I don't think that's very fair at all, especially considering that we don't even know if it would have worked anyway. you
Right.
know? So,
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's actually a huge point of contention for me for
Yeah.
the game. It's like there's not anything in our world where researching it involves murdering the person who has immunity. Like
yeah.
you guys didn't think to maybe just analyze her blood or nothing. Like we just went straight to let's pop her head open.
Right. And it does bug me that now in the sequel they speak about that moment as it would have cured all mankind, and I'm like, we don't know that.
Yeah, you don't fucking know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't fucking know that. Yeah, you just don't have that information. And like we said, the odds of her being the only immunity not a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's no way she's the only one. It's not probable, right?
Right.
Not saying it's not possible, but it's not even remotely probable. Here's my prediction.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's all this casting rumor going around the internet about who they're going to cast as Abby. I think we are going to see a young Abby in this season.
That is extremely bold. Do you think we see her like in the last episode?
Or towards it.
Towards the, my issue with that is that would almost fulfill Neil Druckmann's wet dream of having Joel being further villainized.
Right.
And that again, that throws off the balance of the discussion to be had at the end of the first game.
I agree. Well, no, I think in a TV show, I think introducing the viewers to her now is going to help to make her sympathetic later, because it's like if Joel goes on the killing spree and then it's like, oh, that was my dad, blah blah blah. Then it's gonna be like, where the fuck did this bitch come from?
Right.
To the viewers.
Yeah.
Whereas if we see her in this season, like, I think that is a much bigger like ploy. Like, I would love the episode, like them to do like, almost a Marvel-esque mid-credit scene of just like the little girl standing in the lab with the bodies everywhere. Like, I think that would be a amazing like kind of post-credit scene to lead into season 2.
Would you have it be the same actress who would play Abby in season 2 or a different one?
No, because there has to be a time jump, right?
It has to be a time.
And
But even with Bella Ramsey though,
That's true. Well, I think they make her look younger for season 1 to be Ellie, because I think she's like 17.
She's 18.
She's 18. Yeah. So they'll just do the opposite and they'll make up and everything. And we're not going to get season 2 next year. It'll be 2 years.
Oh, at least,
it's
right?
HBO. It'll be 2 years. So.
So I think that the only thing that I don't like about that idea is for most people, I would argue that most people who are watching the show actually haven't played the video game.
Right.
And I don't think that you want to potentially let the cat out of the bag when you meet Abby, that's who she is.
Right.
Because it needs to be a surprise to the viewer at the same time it's a surprise to Joel.
And see, I just don't think that shit worked in the game.
It
I
didn't.
don't think it's going to work on the TV either. They're going to be like, who is this little girl? What the fuck? Like that doesn't happen. Like, it's just like, it's like them shitting all over the phrase and then going to the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. You're going to tell me that they didn't set that up to where Robb Stark looks like a fucking moron for going, but it still gut punched the entire planet.
Right.
And like, can you imagine if you never met the phrase before? Like, you didn't know anything about him. They never showed that he was supposed to marry that other girl. They never set it up at all. And these guys just pop out with crossbows at the fucking wedding, and you'd have been like, what the fuck?
Well, and to follow that up, then imagine if you spend the rest of that season
playing as Frey. In between hanging up rules at Hogwarts. Right. This motherfucker. Oh, my God. They just can't do it, man.
No.
They can't do it.
They can't. And I'm sure that they're brainstorming this thing now, and they need to. Because for so many reasons that you mentioned, are you really going to get Pedro Pascal to come back for 1 or 2 episodes? Well, there'll be flashbacks, so they're probably justified with that.
Right. Still.
Yeah.
Just give me another. Just season 2. They're just gonna make it 9 episodes of Bill and Frank, just them chilling. And
I would take
prefer
that.
It. Yeah.
They could pull a Spartacus. Remember Spartacus season 2,
where they did Gods of the Arena.
Yeah,
Gods of the Arena is my favorite season of Spartacus.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you got anything else on this one, man? Before we wrap up.
I mean, again, I think that this episode, while not my favorite, it still did a lot of things right, and I still overall had a good time with it. It was a little short on the runtime, and I think that they could have used those extra 5 to 10 minutes to flesh out certain scenes and moments. But like we mentioned earlier, the choice of music, the aesthetic, and the chemistry between Pedro and Bella, I think, are really leading this episode right now. And really looking forward to episode 5. Not just because of how this one ends, but, thematically speaking, I kind of have an idea of what has to happen next, and I can't wait to see how that plays out.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm really excited for next week's episode. Well, man, thank you for joining me here. As always, it's been a blast. I know you've been waiting since I announced I was going to cover this to come on and talk about it. Superhero homies, we just talked last week. We did an amazing, 2.5 hour breakdown on James Gunn's DC Universe, which is a crazy thing to be saying still. We have talked about that we're going to fan cast our own version of that at some point, which I'm really excited about that.
Oh, me too. Now, just for clarification, we're doing more than fan casting, right?
Yeah.
We're also booking this thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea here is we have access to every property that DC owns, and any living actors, and we're going to plan our own slate for what we would do, and a plot synopsis. And I think there's 10 movies and 5 movies and 5 TV shows.
Right.
So I think we'll do 10 things and a mix of you can pick your own mix of movies and TV.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so we're gonna do an episode about that, and I'm super fucking excited because that sounds really fun.
Yeah, that's gonna be a ton of fun. And, who knows? Maybe James Gunn or Peter Safran, somebody there's listening, taking notes.
Yeah.
I
can go ahead and spoil Aces for you now. Batman, Robin, Batman 2, Batgirl, Under the Red Hood, Batman 3. And then there's, Superman at the end.
Hey. That may or may not be accurate. Time will tell.
Oh wait, no, a Watchmen. Watchmen, yeah.
Of course, we got to rope them in,
Yeah.
So
yeah,
absolutely. But we also already discussed Matthew McConaughey as Mr. Freeze.
We did outline that as a rule that I will not put that in mine. You are not limited from putting it in yours. We actually said that the Batman in general, the Matt Reeves stuff, is completely off limits.
Right.
So I know that you can't get your dream casting for that. So I apologize that we had to take that off the table. But what else we got coming up, man?
Yeah. So actually, you just mentioned the episode we did covering the DCU. The day before we did that, Kevin and I we did an episode about the history of the DCU and kind of how that ended and what we thought was going to happen in the future. I wanted to do something similar actually with you very soon. We had to do this actually before Quantumania comes out, where we look at very quickly at the first 3 phases and why they were so successful. Maybe what happened with Phase 4 and then what Phase 5 needs to do in the coming years. So actually, I have it down here, the properties and when they're coming out for Phase 5. Where we're excited for maybe what needs to happen for them to kind of pivot and to get back on track.
Yeah, because this is important for them. They need to nail this because James Gunn's coming out swinging in 25.
Yeah.
I think he has all the momentum right now. And that's one thing that Marvel had. And, when a new DC movie would come out, I think the general public would go, well, it's not in the MCU. It's just DC.
Right.
It's you don't want that. But, I think right now, that the pendulum has swung in the other direction, where I think people are oh, well, it's not like before where it would be well, I don't give a fuck about Ant-Man, but there's going to be something in here for the overall storyline, and so I got to go see this.
Right.
And now I don't think a lot of people I think Kang is a big selling point.
Yes.
Because it's finally are we going to get a new central story, whereas most of Phase 4 it was just that connective tissue barely even exists.
Right.
So it's I'm not showing up for a random line Easter egg.
Yeah.
Where it's oh man, we forgot to put this in the script. So in the middle of Thor 4, somebody's you remember that time we hung out with Tony Stark? Yeah, I remember that shit. And that's it. And that's all,
Yeah.
And I think that DC is oh no, all our shit's one universe. Movies, video games, animation, everything. We're going to have the same actors in animation. Hopefully Sebastian Stan isn't cast for anything. I just think, especially when Guardians 3, I think Guardians 3 is going to be a big hit. And I think James Gunn is on a very successful tear with Guardians, with Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and now Guardians 3. And then going into DCU, he is on a winning streak.
Oh, yeah.
I really think that James Gunn's DC Universe, we talked about this a bit. It comes down to this Superman movie.
Mm-hmm.
They have to kill it.
Yeah.
And I hope he directs it for that reason.
Same. I'm actually kind of leaning the other way. So I think that Marvel, for me to have a mixed bag for 2024, like literally, I'm really stoked for half of the things, and the other half, I'm like, why are we getting this? But the 2023. I'm sorry, their 2023 is a mixed bag, but their 2024, I think, is very strong. At least,
think so too.
Yeah, at least like on paper, like they have a very strong 2024.
Well, and that's the thing too is going into 2025, which is when the DCU is going to kick off.
Yeah.
Marvel's going to be headed straight towards Secret Wars at that point.
Right.
So we're looking at like a almost Phase 3 level where Marvel's got to be kicking on all engines, right, by that point. So I think they got 2 years to get that momentum and that hype back going.
Yeah.
And if they're still – I'm not going to say they're flatlining, right, because they're definitely not.
No.
But if they're still phoning that shit in 2 years from now, James Gunn's going to sweep them up. And James Gunn's
right.
even bold enough to say things like, we're not going to make the mistakes Marvel made.
Yeah, and that's so bold to say.
Yeah,
like,
imagine saying that about
Right.
the thing keeping cinema open.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. That's so bold. But yeah, and so that's one of the really big ones we have coming up here. Obviously, I'm also going to have you on again, and hopefully the homie Joe on for the actual review of Quantumania, kicking off Phase 5 proper.
And you'll hear our tone in that, and that'll tell you exactly
Yeah.
how Phase 5 is going.
Right. And so those are two big ones coming up. But even just for tomorrow, Kevin and I, we're going to do a little bit of talk about villains. It will not be like what we have coming up for the end of the season here on Entertainment Evolved. But I'm really looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to both those episodes. I can't wait to hear what you guys come up with. I actually, for whatever reason, I guess it's because of this DCU announcement, I've been talking about Reverse Flash a lot with a lot of people lately. Because he is the one, I think he's the best comic book villain that has not had a movie yet.
Yeah, you're right.
And the depth that you can go with him, and he's just such a fucking piece of shit. Like,
He's so fucked up. Not to go off on a tangent on that, but I have the Flashpoint Omnibus, and I haven't read it all the way through yet. It's a very, very big book. The actual Flashpoint story is like a quarter of an inch thick. So I was like, what in the fuck is in this? But it starts off with the origin story of Reverse Flash.
Right.
And, reading that, you're just like, oh, so this guy was just an asshole from day one.
From day one, yeah. He was born a complete piece
Right.
of shit. Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to all of that, man. And especially when we wrap up this season, I think I'm making the call now. I think when we finish Last of Us, I've got maybe one more episode I want to do, maybe two. We actually might. This has been a very heavy episode regarding heavy review season. So I think we're gonna have at least one more Evolved review. I think this is gonna be our first book review.
Oh, nice.
On the show. As to what it's gonna be, I can't quite say yet because I want to be 100% sure it's gonna happen before I announce it. I don't want this to be like that damn Vince McMahon episode we never did that I talked about for like 7 times and then we never did it. But also, I do have one more kind of character piece, interview kind of breakdown that I cannot spoil on air yet. Next week, though, I will reveal it. I'll be able to talk about it by then because it's not public yet. It involves another company. And so I kind of have to respect their release date on that. But we have a very interesting collaboration coming up, and I'm super excited about it. So.
Well, yeah, no, I'm super stoked to hear about this.
Well, I'll tell you about it as soon as we get
Oh,
off
okay,
the air.
good. I was going to say, you
I just can't put it on the air yet.
Gotcha. So you can't blue ball me like that.
No, I cannot. So, well, man, as always, man, thank you for coming on. And everybody at home, check out Superhero Homies, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, man. This has been, again, another amazing episode. I wasn't going to use a catchphrase there.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't just been that. I mean, it's also been an Evolved review.